Today makes 20 years of marriage. And I can tell y'all that I'm not the man I am today without this woman right here. That's right. Let's go all the way back 21 years, a little over 21 years ago. I came home from prison after doing 6 years and I was on parole. I had just got out of prison and only stayed home for 10 months after doing 2 years. I had been in and out of prison much of my teenage years, resulting in a total of about 10 years in prison by the time I got out of prison in 2005. And that's where I met my beautiful wife in 2005 on Bourbon Street in New Orleans. And you might be asking, why in the world was I on Bourbon Street fresh out of prison while I was on parole? Well, back when I was growing up, Bourbon Street was one of the places to go to have a good time. That's where everybody went. It was either two places growing up in the New Orleans area that people went to: Bourbon Street to party or Fat City. That was in Metairie, right outside of New Orleans. Those were the two main places that were filled with nightlife and a lot of action. Whatever kind of trouble you wanted to get into, you could find it there. But in 2005, I didn't find myself looking for trouble. I was just trying to relax and have a good time. I was actually with my cousin, if I recall correctly. And I remember this girl coming up to me asking with her friend if I knew of any good places to eat on Bourbon Street. And I'm like, nah, I don't know any good places I would eat on Bourbon Street. Actually, I wouldn't eat on Bourbon Street. They asked about the Lucky Dog stand. That's the hot dogs that you get on Bourbon Street. Little Lucky Dog stand, you know it. You see them in New York. It looks like a hot dog stand. The hot dog stand literally looks like a hot dog, and they put a little mustard on there, a little ketchup. I don't even know if they got any other toppings. Maybe they have relish or onions, and bam, 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 you slam it. Most of the people who are eating it are inebriated, so they really don't care. They really don't know what it tastes like. But I'm like, nah, I would not eat that Lucky Dog hot dog on Bourbon Street. I don't trust it. You're gonna get sick. The funny thing is, y'all, is years and years later, we would go on a trip, our first trip to New York, my mom was the one who blessed us with the trip because my mom always wanted us to go to New York because my mom loved New York. So we took a trip to New York. And one of the things that I always wanted to do while I was in prison was eat a Lucky Dog hot dog on the streets of Manhattan. So it's funny how full circle comes around. And there I was telling my wife in 2005 not to eat that Lucky Dog hot dog with her friend on Bourbon Street. But yet there's a picture of me somewhere, and I'm going to find it, of me eating a Lucky Dog hot dog. Man, I really hope I can find that picture because I would really love to share that picture with y'all. And I don't know if I'm gonna find it before I put this video up, but when I do find it, I'm gonna put it up because it was on my bucket list to eat a Lucky Dog hot dog in New York. Anyway, this is where I met my wife on Bourbon Street, and she's asking me where to get something to eat at. Somehow or another, she asked me if I was into her friend or something, and I told her, no, I'm interested in you. And she's like, oh, so we traded phone numbers. She can tell you the story better than me. I don't listen. My recollection of exactly how it went is not the same as my wife's because I'm forgetting some details that she remembers all the details. Anyway, we traded phone numbers. We spoke that night, and I think maybe I guided her to a restaurant somewhere in New Orleans. I don't remember. But the only reason my wife was on Bourbon Street that particular night is because she was still on active duty in the military. And the only way that she didn't have to go to duty that weekend was to go to her supervisor's bachelorette party, which was in New Orleans, and they were stationed in Baton Rouge. And she really didn't want to go to New Orleans, but she also really didn't want to go to work. So it was like, go to the bachelorette party or go to work that particular weekend. So she decided to go to New Orleans to the bachelorette party. And that's where she met me. And I was fresh out of prison. I think I was out of prison for maybe right over a month and a half when I met my wife. Immediately, we hit it off. And sometime probably about 2 or 3 weeks after we met, we took a trip to Destin, Florida, while we were in Destin, Florida, we were just getting to know each other, and we were hanging out in Destin, Florida, and that's when Hurricane Katrina hit. I got out months before Hurricane Katrina. Of course, you hear all kind of nightmare stories about dudes who were locked up during Hurricane Katrina. I personally left a lot of my people in prison during Hurricane Katrina, so there's no shortage of Hurricane Katrina prison stories. But I was blessed enough to escape it because I was released on parole literally months before Hurricane Katrina hit. Anyway, me and my wife are in Destin, Florida. My parents, who I was living with when I got out of prison, obviously because I didn't have a house or nowhere to live, I was trying to get back on my feet and trying to figure life out. I had a job. I got a job immediately when I got out of prison. I was welding, and I was welding on the bayou, welding on boats and pipes and all that stuff. Anyway, the company I worked for in the area where my mom and dad lived was totally devastated by Hurricane Katrina. And then later on after Hurricane Katrina, there was another hurricane, Hurricane Rita, and it destroyed stuff right after, even worse than Hurricane Katrina had already done. So it was ×2. I couldn't go back. My wife had a suite that the military was paying for, and I was blessed enough to be able to stay with her. So from the time that we went on our vacation to Destin, Florida, to this very day, we have literally been living together. We got married about 1 year after we met. We got engaged right after we got back from Hurricane Katrina. The Hurricane Katrina vacation wound up being an extended vacation where we went from Destin, Florida to Georgia. We stayed in Georgia a little while. We made our way maybe to Mississippi, stayed in northern Mississippi a while. It was like a 3-week vacation because you couldn't get back to New Orleans or Mississippi or southern Mississippi because of all the damage that had occurred because of Hurricane Katrina. So we had a lot of time to really hang out, and we were blessed enough because we were ahead of everybody else during Hurricane Katrina. Because I remember we had our phones. This is before smartphones, but you still had cell phones. I had the flip up Nokia, or maybe she had a Nokia and I had a Motorola, and we had them. I was fresh to these phone calls. 'Cause you got to think, when I went to prison, everybody didn't have cell phones. People were still walking around with the cell phone, with the strap, with the big cell phone, the big brick, and you hold it. People were kind of starting to get into those when I went to prison in the 90s. But by the time I got out, everybody pretty much has a cell phone. So I got my cell phone. She got a cell phone. They are on mute, silence. We don't have them on because we're getting to know each other. Anyway, I remember looking at my phone and I had like 50 something missed calls. And when the first person I called back was my dad. I said, "What's going on?" He said, "There's a hurricane coming." I said, "Really?" I said, and we didn't know. And it didn't dawn on us till we were having ice cream in Destin, Florida, that a lady said, "Are y'all evacuees?" And we like, "Evacuees?" And she said, "Yeah, that hurricane's coming. There's a big hurricane coming. It's about to hit in a couple of days. It's going to be hitting New Orleans. Everybody's evacuating." We're like, "What?" And so that's when we found out, and we got on our cell phones and we had people calling us. And my dad was like, "Do not come back. Stay where you at." I was like, "All right." So we got to extend our vacation in Destin, and we got to get ahead of everybody else. So we booked hotels in Georgia and in northern Mississippi till we eventually maybe it was over 3 weeks later before we finally got back to Louisiana because of all the devastation. And my wife was in a suite in Baton Rouge. She had to get back because she was in the military and they needed her to report back. So we finally got back to Baton Rouge. And when we got back to Baton Rouge, my parole, I was on parole too, keep in mind, y'all, I was on parole. But Hurricane Katrina threw so much stuff in New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Jefferson Parish, St. Tammany Parish, southern Mississippi, all out of whack to a lot of people who was on probation and parole. The probation and parole officers they didn't have nowhere to operate out of. So it took them months and months to get back online and start figuring out where everybody was at. So I was kind of blessed that my parole was real nonchalant and very unsupervised. And it should have been highly supervised because I was considered what they call a career criminal, violent offender, double billed. I got all that stuff. I had flat time. And so multiple sentences run consecutive, not concurrent. And because of the storm, I only saw my parole officer like 2 or 3 times. And one time my dad called me because I was in Baton Rouge. He told my dad, he said, I need you to tell him that if I don't see him by the end of this week, we're going to revoke his parole and put him back in prison. And my dad was like, "Oh man, y'all really going to do that?" And the parole officer looked at my dad, and he told my dad not to. I didn't find this out till later. He looked at my dad. He said, "No, we're really not going to do that. Just tell him that so I can see him." And my dad said, "All right." And so I went to my dad's house on the bayou, which they were They had generators running, cleaning up and everything. And he came back then, he saw me, we shook hands. He said, look, I'm probably not going to see you again. He said, make your payments and send in this little slip. And he said, when your parole's over, I'll release you. Shook his hand, said thanks. And that was the last time I saw my parole officer. And he did just what he said. He released me, like it was like a year later, he released me. I was off of parole. And I don't even think I paid all the money because they forfeited that because people couldn't keep their jobs. The job I had didn't come back till like 7, 8 months later. And by the time it came back, I was already residing in Baton Rouge. Me and my wife had already got an apartment at that time. And we were living in the hood, y'all. We was living in a one way in, one way out neighborhood. Early on, you got to think I'm changing my life. I'm not trying to go back. I'm not hanging on the set. I'm not trying to slang. I'm not trying to bang. I'm not trying to do nothing wrong. I'm walking the straight and narrow. I want to be a civilian. I want to live the life that we all talk about while we're still in prison. Now that I'm home from prison, I want to live that life. I want to live a good life. I don't want to go back to prison. I don't have nothing to prove. I'm trying to get all my relationships and all my affairs in order. Like I said, I'm blessed. I have a new relationship with my wife. I'm trying to establish a relationship with my children at this time. So I'm trying to do things, and there's a lot going on, including this hurricane that thrust everything into mass confusion. So I get a job in Baton Rouge, just comes to find out that my wife's supervisor was married to a guy who was best friends with a dude who I was in prison with. And when one day he was on the phone and he said a dude's nickname, Peanut, I said, Peanut, what's Peanut's first name? And he said, that's Mike. And I said, Mike so-and-so. He said, yeah. Sure enough, I said, tell him what's up. He said, he was on the phone. He said, hey, dude named Greg told you to tell him what's up. And he said, he don't know Greg. He said, I said, tell him Milk. You know, everybody called me Milk. That's all I was known for the whole time I was growing up. He said, Milk said, what's up? And the dude, as soon as you can hear my boy on the phone, he's like, that's my boy Milk, man. I knew you. He said, nah, he's working with us. And so he put a lot of he put his name online, said, look, that's a good dude, man. Let him keep the job, man. He's a good hard worker, man. I was in prison with him, solid dude. And, God bless Mike. He wound up losing his life. He overdosed, years and years later, but he actually came to my wedding. So I'm gonna see if I can find a picture of him in my wedding. I'll put it up if I can find him in the background or something. But he showed up at my wedding, and I really appreciate that. But Mike's no longer with us now, and I was in prison with him. But anyway, me and my wife get married, and here it is, 20 years later, y'all. And since me and my wife been married, and before me and my wife got married, y'all, it's been slightly over 21 years that I've been home from prison, and I've been 100% clean. I have not been arrested. I have not been implicated in anything. Actually, I tried to get a job with the police department in probation and parole when I first got out, when I couldn't find, my first 2 weeks, I was trying to figure out what to do for work before my dad was able to help me get that welding job. And I remember I was frustrated. I remember going to the probation and parole officer, and I said, hey, can I get a job? And they're like, what you mean a job? I said, listen, y'all require me to have a job. Well, hire me. And they're like, I don't think there's jobs where we hire probation and parolees that are coming home from prison. I'm like, well, I need a job. Y'all need to do something. They thought I was crazy. I went there and talked to my parole officer, the same dude who shook my hand and said that he wouldn't have to see me again. That was the second time I saw him. And when I told him, I said, man, you got an application? He said, I can give you an application, Greg. He said, you're the first person who's ever asked me if they can get an application for a job. I said, well, I need to work. Help me work. And they thought I was crazy, but I tended to do, unconventional things like that throughout my life. But here I am. And me and my wife get married, and my wife is a country girl from a little small town called Ventress, Louisiana. It's called the Highland, and it's out in New Roads, and it's a little bitty small town. The only reason I ever heard of New Roads, y'all, in this area of Point Coupee Parish in Louisiana was because while I was in prison, it's one of those little parishes where all the dudes who grew up on the block, they're all in prison. So there's no shortage of dudes in prison who are from New Roads. Even though New Roads wouldn't be considered my rounds because I'm from New Orleans, there was a lot of dudes in prison from New Roads. That's the only reason I ever heard of New Roads. And that's where my wife was from. And I went up there for the first time, met her family and everything. And, it's just been a blessing ever since, because the man that I became is because of the woman that God put in my life. I was blessed, y'all. And I would say the one thing that an ex-con can do And one of the most important decisions an ex-con can make is picking the right person that they are going to spend their lives with, because it can go bad. Because I know people who pick the wrong person. And what I mean by the wrong person, it doesn't mean that the person that you pick is not worth loving. But if you get with somebody who can't love themselves, or if they're addicted to substances, or if they're addicted to an unhealthy lifestyle, that eventually is going to bleed over into your marriage or your relationship. And it's going to cause an ex-con to get put into some circumstances where he's going to make some bad decisions. It always reflects. You'll start arguing and fighting. Next thing you know, cops are coming. And next thing you know, you're also addicted to some of the same substances that you're trying to help this person fight against. It winds up bleeding off into your life, and then you get addicted as well. Next thing you know, you're back in prison, and the revolving door never stops. We have to be wise when picking a person who we're going to be in a relationship with. I'm blessed enough to where I know that God placed my wife in the place that she was at the time that I met her, because I believe that he brought us together so that I can become the man I am today, a better man. We had to deal with a lot of issues, but here we are 20 years later. There's a lot of stuff that nobody taught either of us that we had to learn together. And obviously, I got a late start because I spent most of my 20s in prison. All of my 20s up until the moment that I met her was in prison. And my teenage years were ripping and running in and out of juvie, in and out of jail. And so I got a late start, and that was on me. I can't blame nobody but myself. But because I was blessed to have the right woman in my life, I was able to climb and conquer a lot of mountains that I believe without the right woman in my life, I would not have been able to climb and conquer. I would not be successful in some of the areas that I'm successful at today, including being a law-abiding citizen who does his best to help society and help other people not to go down the same roads that I once went down. And also to encourage ex-cons like myself not to give up, because it's when we start giving up that we start failing. And so I just wanted to share that story and just let everybody know that at 20 years of marriage, that's a big milestone. That's a big milestone. A lot of people who never been to prison don't stay married 20 years. It's hard nowadays to stay committed to one relationship, one marriage, because we live in a society where everybody wants to jump from relationship to relationship without commitment. A relationship, to love somebody, takes commitment. It is more than just butterfly feelings and partying and having a good time. It is walking through life together, man. You learn to build a life together. You build bank accounts together. You build families together. You bring two separate families together. You build homes together. You build businesses together. You build ministries together. These are all the type of things that me and my wife done together. And we've had failures and we've had setbacks, but we learn what it takes to work through those failures and setbacks, and to look in the mirror and look into the mirror and address the things that we could address that are our own problems. Instead of, blaming all the external circumstances, it usually starts with, blaming yourself, looking in the mirror and say, hey, look, I got to be a better person. And we learn that with one another, me and my wife. And I just wanted to share that with y'all today, that, if you're an ex-con, or you're a con to this very day, and, or you're going through the system, man, be wise, pray. If you believe in God, pray to God. And I would say, if you don't believe in God, pray that God reveals himself to you so that he can help you pick the right person that's going to be in your life for the rest of your life. And I believe that if we're wise and careful on who we pick, it can and will make a difference in our lives. And if you failed and the person that you wanted to be with, you really did love, and it didn't work out, don't beat yourself up neither, because there's always, picking yourself, getting back up, and then letting God guide you into the next part of your life and the person who you will be with. So let's not beat ourselves up for failures. Like I said, we made many of them. It's just we had to get back on track. Anyway, like and subscribe to The Pen and the Shank, the most unusual and unique crime and prison channel experience on YouTube. Today, I just wanted to give y'all, some history on where me and my wife came from, and say happy anniversary to my wife. And I'm looking forward to another 20 years of marriage. Let's get it.